Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for participating in this very important webinar this evening. Tonight, we'll have an opportunity to hear from educational leaders that are truly addressing the issues of racial justice and equity in their school districts. So we're very grateful for your presence. As we gather tonight, may we recognize that these issues are really critical issues that are facing schools and our broader society. My name is Dan Neerad, and I've had the distinct opportunity of being able to spend 45 years in public education and served as a superintendent in Green Bay, Madison, and in Birmingham, Michigan. And as we, again, come together tonight for this opportunity to learn and to have some conversation, we know that our society is clearly, in addition to being in the middle of an unsightly pandemic involving our physical health, but we're also wrestling with issues of racial justice and the equitable and equal treatment of all people that are in our midst. This wrestle is not only a necessary thing now, and it has been all along for that matter, but it's also a good thing. And in addition, it's also a hard thing for many of us. And that hard thing calls for us to gather like we do tonight, to be able to have good conversations about how we come to understand these issues and how we can find solutions to these very, very important issues. So with that said, I'll turn it over to the other facilitator tonight, Louise Blankenheim.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone. I'm Louise Blankenheim. I am one of the WASB consultants. I've been with WASB for 3 years, helping school boards with their governance and superintendent search work. I'm a retired superintendent from Kiel. Prior to that, I was executive director of curriculum in Green Bay, and that's where I really got my start in learning about and doing that important work of developing culturally responsive curriculum. So I believe this work toward equity and social justice in our schools involves, or requires, I could say, a cultural shift in how we accept all people with different backgrounds and how we respect one another of different backgrounds. I believe that this cultural shift is the start of it, and it's up to us as school leaders to get that in our district so that all children can benefit from the learning opportunities that we provide them. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm really happy you're here. We have a great session planned for you. I just have a couple of housekeeping things. It's best to keep your mute on so that when you're not speaking, then that'll take away any background music, or the dog barking, which is, he's up here now. But and also, if you have questions, there's a chat room on below your screen. For those of you who aren't familiar, just press chat and it'll you can put your question in there, or your message, or your comment. Because after each of the panelists speaks, we will have a Q&A time so that you can we can dialogue a little bit with you. So again, thank you, and Dan, it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Louise. And in very quick order, we want to be able to hear from our leaders that join us tonight. But I just want to spend a few minutes on the why of this topic. And for many, it's very evident. And it's evident in terms of kids not finding their place with us. And it's evident with our results for some kids. They're not doing as well as other kids. So there is a degree of this being an evident problem. But at the same time, we know that schools are a microcosm of our broader society and culture. And as schools and school districts, we do in fact have a dual mission. And that dual mission is to not only help kids learn well and to educate them well, but also to help them, along with families, to develop well as human beings. And so we do have a citizenship responsibility as well. And that area of our mission compels us to make sure that we're working with our young people to help them develop the necessary skills to be able to interact with a broad range of human beings, and to be able to find their place with others, and to be able to know about differences, and to be able to respect differences. So that's part of our why. We are, in fact, a broader, a microcosm of what exists in the broader society. In addition, let's think just for a minute around this whole notion of what districts may have an interest in learning about these topics. That may strike you as a somewhat of a strange question, because we have a very strong belief that all districts have a reason to be engaged with these conversations. And it is not only districts that have high percentages of low-income children, high percentages of African-American children that have a need to engage in these issues around racial justice and equity. But why is that the case? That's the case because the world that children will inherit from us is not a world of sameness. It's a world of vast differences. And we have an obligation to help our young people learn about differences when young, and to help them live peacefully with each other, and to help them interact, survive, and thrive in this 21st century world that we all are a part of. And so that need exists in all districts. And so our encouragement is, yes, it's an important issue around the kids that you serve and the needs that they may have, in particular kids of color, in particular low-income kids, kids with disabilities. But this really is an issue that affects all of us and affects all school districts as an important piece of the why. Just a couple of other points. As a result of living in this very unique time, we've come to see that schooling will be different, and in many ways, schooling must be different. Number one, we have an obligation to protect the health of kids and staff. But a key question for us to think about as we engage in this conversation tonight is, what is health? And of course, the pandemic takes us immediately to the issues of physical health. But isn't it also true that we have an obligation to address emotional health and the emotional well-being and the social well-being of our kids? So as a result, we can no longer, and we should no longer, tolerate the racial offense that our kids of color, our Black students in particular, face in our schools and our broader society. It's an issue that causes us to compel us to join together, to learn as we are tonight, and to take action. We also know, as a part of the why, that there are opportunity gaps between haves and have-nots. And all doors must be open for all of our kids if they're going to have the greatest opportunity to be successful. That pushes us into this conversation about equity. Some kids needing things different, some kids needing more of some kinds of things. And that's an important part of the why. And then finally, for students of color, racism does speak to their experience in our schools and broader society. The global pandemic, interestingly, has illuminated this issue in somewhat unforeseen ways. So let me share a recent writing from a superintendent in Virginia's Alexandria City Public Schools. His name is Gregory Hutchings, and he recently reported data about student engagement during our current time of school closures. And the data, according to Hutchings, in a rare occasion, suggested there was no discrepancy or disparity in engagement between Black, Latino, and white students. And he goes on to say, typically our Black and brown students don't feel as engaged as their white counterparts. And he says that this is the first time that we're seeing no disparity. And he concludes by saying, that to me is concerning, because what it means is that our Black and brown kids who don't feel safe in school are now feeling a greater sense of welcome and engagement through their learning on a remote basis. And he closes his quote by saying, that is shocking. And I find it shocking as well. So each of us should take pause in what Hutchings has shared. And those of us that have spent our lives in public education know how important school and schooling is. And frankly, we wake up every day to do what's right by kids. But the reality is that our good intentions are not enough. And confronting the fact that racism does exist in our schools can no longer be ignored nor tolerated. Again, causing us to learn, causing us to gather, and causing us to act. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Tom Weber. Tom is a member of the WASB Board of Directors and represents Region 12. and he's also the Vice President of the Board of Education in the Sun Prairie Area School District. He is going to provide us some very important information about the commitments that WASB is making to focus on issues of racial justice and to focus on educational equity. So we welcome Tom tonight, and we thank you for your willingness to be a part of this, and let's turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm the one in the orange t-shirt that, for whatever reason, forgot to dress up for the event. So my apologies. But anyway, welcome. I'm glad everybody's here. This is a really important topic to both the WASB, it is in my district in Sun Prairie, and really has become over a number of years a passion of mine personally as well. And so now, Dan, are we going to the PowerPoint or?
Yes, we will go to the PowerPoint, and Louise is going to put it up.
Or am I just supposed to?
Are you able to see it, Tom?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Okay, so what I wanted to do tonight is just give you guys a little bit of an idea of what we're doing from a board standpoint at the WASB to really further the conversation around this whole subject. So, Luis, you can go to the next slide. All right, so the WASB board is focused and has been focused on equity for some time. And just even looking back in the last few years, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that we have done as a board. And going back to June of 2018, the board adopted a WASB equity statement that many of you have seen. It appears in a variety of different areas and publications, our website and other places. And that really came about following an effort that a number of our board members participated in with the NSBA. And the NSBA was really working towards a focus on equity nationwide. And so we wanted to be able to participate in that here in Wisconsin as well. And we really used that statement as a springboard within WASB to provide professional development around issues of equity and highlight a number of thought-provoking stories and other information and things like school news. And so that was a great start for us. Then in November of 2019, and a little bit prior to that, I guess, the board put forward a resolution to the Policy and Resolutions Committee as far as recognizing student equity in partnering organizations to the school boards. And so what that looked like was organizations like, for instance, WIAA and those types of organizations that really provide our school districts with the organizational backbone for a lot of the extracurriculars that our kids participate in. And so the way that kind of started out, and I think it kind of summarizes perhaps what we were looking for there, is that all public school students should have an equitable and valuable and respectful experiences through participation in extracurricular activities. And so a few of the examples that maybe highlight what that was and what that spoke to some extent is at that fall, I know Brown Deer had experienced a number of concerns around some of their sports, that we had some racial tensions and some racial issues. And perhaps Monica will talk about that later. I'm not real sure. But the other thing is that as we take a look at WIAA, for instance, and how that group is organized, there's a number of nuances and potential conflicts that can come from that public-private partnership in the membership of WIAA, and the private schools and the public schools sometimes have a little bit different take or willingness perhaps around some of our racial and equity items. And so just as by way of example, those are a couple of the things there that I think were on our minds when we brought that forward. Then in June of 2020, just this past June, the board adopted a statement on equity and racial justice. And that statement started out with talking about public education and how we need to add our voice to the collective call for a more fair and just society. And we need to take a leadership role in finding solutions. But first, we have to really recognize our own shortcomings. The statement, which I think is really about 2 pages, runs a little bit longer than that, obviously. But we also, in that statement, intentionally asked some thought-provoking questions for boards and individuals really to ask themselves and take a look at. And you're way far ahead on my PowerPoint. So, and what the board had said in our meeting when we discussed this and adopted it is that we really wanted the statement not simply to be more words on a page, but really truly be actionable in nature. And those questions really help provide some of that ability to be actionable. One of the actions then that came from that at the meeting was to establish a task force within the board to really take a look at this whole equity and social justice piece that we really wanted to push forward. And so we pulled together a task force, and you can see on the slide there who are the members of that task force from the board. I am chairing that task force, which is part of the reason I'm trying to give a bit of a summary of what some of our work is here. John Ashley participates in that. He's our executive director. I'm sure most of you know him. And then Tony Baez, who is a school board member in the Milwaukee Public School District. Barb Herzog, who I believe is on tonight. At least I saw Barb earlier, I think, and she's from Oshkosh. Brett Hyde from Muskego, Norway. Mary Jo Rosmakowski from Black River Falls, and Sue Today from Sheboygan. And so that is our task force at this point in time. You can go to the next slide now. So why a task force on equity and racial justice? And we really wanted to ensure this actionableness. And I know that's not really a word. I'm not an English person, I'm an engineer, so I feel like I can make stuff up like that once in a while to fit what we need. But we really did want to ensure the ability for action to come from this. And I thought this is a really great quote, and it slips my mind right off the top of my head who said it. Used to have it at the bottom of my email. But the world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. And I'm sure that there's times that we would love to tell some of our constituents that as well, perhaps particularly in COVID times that we have as far as trying to figure out reopening plans. But nonetheless, I think it really speaks to, again, what we're looking to try to do. And when we talked about actionableness, if you will, or actions coming from the work of the task force, we're really talking about the WASB staff, we're talking about the board ourselves, and we're also talking about the membership of the WASB and providing that avenue for action to be able to occur all the way across that spectrum. So next slide. All right, so what are we working on at the task force right now? And we have just really begun our work. We've only met twice, so we adopted that resolution at our board meeting in June. And so here we are at the end of July, we've met twice. And we're really looking to try to right now establish the purpose and the goals of the task force in some concrete manner that we can work from and test ourselves against. One of the things that we've talked about at the task force and talked a little bit about at our board meeting as well is really wanting to be able to develop a legacy program with this effort. This isn't a one and done issue. I mean, this is a really long road that we're on. But at the same time, it's a pretty exciting journey that I think there's a lot of people jumping on board and wanting to take this journey more than I think we've seen at other times throughout history. But the board really, and the task force in particular, really wants to see this be a legacy program. So we're talking about how does that happen. We're also looking at an intentional focus on both equity and racial justice. And racial justice is perhaps a component of equity, you may say, and that is true. But we think there's really a needed emphasis that needs to be put on racial justice at this point in our history. And so we're really looking at both of those aspects as being very important for the work that ultimately we do going forward. And in that, we recognize too that all of our districts, all 421 districts in the state, really are at different points in their journey on this. Some districts have perhaps not started on that journey yet. Other districts are further on down the road. And everybody's got a little bit varying need when they're at these different points on their journey. And I think, Dan, you were the one that maybe had a really good analogy about that, is that it's almost like the interstate highway going down, and you've got these on and off ramps that you can get on and off at to be able to try to address various things. And you know, you can't get off at exit 32 if you're still back at mile 5, right? And so we're all in different places along this journey. And so we need to have the ability to serve and support all of our districts, regardless of where we're at on the journey, to make sure that we can keep moving at least down that road, whatever speed that is. Next slide. So then the work of the board and the member districts, our task force is really saying needs to really advance the idea of this awareness, advocacy, and action. Right. And so as we go through this, you know, we really need to create an awareness with folks. We really need to then, after we have an awareness and an understanding, and we're able to learn about that, then we're able to go and begin doing some advocacy work with our communities, with our school districts. And then from there, we can really see some action start to play out. And I know when Brad from our superintendent in Sun Prairie talks, there's a little bit of example that we've got from our district in that regard. So we're kind of looking at a multi-step process, again, looking at where school districts are at, where communities are at. And it's really important, I think, for us to remember that our school districts really are, and Dan touched on this, really are a reflection of the communities we serve. And so it's not just the school district necessarily that needs change. It's really our communities that need change. But yet, as a school district, we're really positioned well to help move that, that discussion and that action within our community. The other thing that we want to do, and this is part of this legacy program for the for this effort, is that we really want to involve the broader membership directly in this work long term. And so our task force is really looking to try to set the stage, organize this, get some of those goals out there. But ultimately, we see this as being a long-term thing that our members are directly involved in. And my best example to that really is taking a look at how we work Policy and Resolutions Committee at WASB. And I'm not suggesting that this would be structured exactly like that, but the Policy and Resolutions Committee is made up of our general members, right, that then go to our delegate assembly. And there's a process where we're really directly involving our membership in that process. And we want to develop a program that works similarly, in concept at least, to that. And then lastly, really, you know, what we're looking for at the end of the day is this ability to promote true system-wide changes and improvements within our districts and our communities. And so that really is the things that we're tasked with working on right now. It's going to take us a little bit to get through that, but we've got a really good committee, really good task force, and we hope that within the next month or two, we've got a pretty good idea around this that we'll bring back to the board and be able to report out to everybody. The next slide. So just wrapping up my part of this night. Today was John Lewis's funeral, and I happened to see the essay that he wrote just shortly before he died and had wanted published on his funeral date, which was today. And there was just a couple of quotes that stuck with me that kind of relate to what we're trying to do here. The first one is that we're all complicit when we tolerate injustice. And so it's really not enough to just say, I'm not biased or I'm not racist, and then just kind of look the other way and go on your business, right? That was actually a quote of Martin Luther King Jr.'s, but I attributed it to John Lewis because it was in his piece. The other one is that ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America. And I thought that really spoke to me as well, because at the end of the day, we're all just ordinary folks serving on our school boards, working in our school districts, just trying to do the best with life that we can. But yet with a little bit of extraordinary vision, I really think we can move Wisconsin in a really positive way to helping to resolve many of these issues that we have. And so with that, I will shut up at this point. And if there's questions, I'm happy to answer them. But that's a little bit about what we're trying to do at the board and with our task force that we just set up.
Tom, thank you very, very much for that very important update about this work. And as you said, it's emerging work. That's a lesson for all of us. You have to begin somewhere on this journey. And we certainly know that that the right kind of steps are being taken to be able to move this issue from an organizational point of view through WASB. And also thank you for your leadership in Sun Prairie. And in a minute, we'll be able to hear a little bit more about that work as well. But before we move forward, does anyone have a specific question right now for Tom? We're going to be able to catch questions at the end too. So I just want to check to see if there might be a question for Tom now.
And I apologize too for having a couple of errors there that were so nicely pointed out in the chat box. But I guess I put down the wrong district for Sue today, and I apologize to Sue for that. And it is Representative John Lewis, not Senator John Lewis. So I figured on his funeral date he could have a little bit of a promotion.
One of the comments from the chat room, Tom, was I appreciate this task force being formed, and I appreciate the leadership of Tom Weber. He rocks.
My friend Amy up in Menominee. So I hope you're doing well, Amy. Amy and I served on the Boundary Appeal Board panel that was figuring out the Palmyra Eagle issue. And so we had an opportunity to spend a lot of time over a couple of months together. So Amy's a great board member from Menominee as well.
Well, thank you very much. And there'll be another opportunity to catch questions. And with that, I'll turn it back to Louise.
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our two panelists tonight. And we are fortunate to have two fantastic superintendents that are showing phenomenal leadership in this area. And we're really happy that they're able to come amongst this busy schedule where I know that they're focusing on the pandemic and you have so many things that you are responsible for to get school started. But we want to welcome Dr. Brad Sarin from Sun Prairie. He's going to be speaking first about his process at Sun Prairie. And then Dr. Monica Kelsey Brown is from Brown Deer, and we will learn from Dr. Kelsey Brown shortly. We will have some time for Q&A after they're finished speaking, so you can either put the questions in the chat room, and then we can bring them up as they come forward. So Brad, welcome.
Thanks for having me, everybody. Do you mind if I share my screen?
No.
Okay. So let me start by just thanking Dan and Louise and Tom and the Wisconsin Association of School Boards for having me here, and also for having this webinar. It's such important work. Tom talked about before about the intention of this committee is to cultivate Wisconsin and to promote true system-wide change on behalf of kids and the kids that need change the most. And so what this is about is how Sun Prairie went about implementing the necessary antecedents to elicit change in our system. And I think in the spirit of Representative Lewis, I think he called that good trouble. So the subtitle to this might be, this is how Sun Prairie is getting into some good trouble. And I just like to thank everybody here. I'm also honored to be here with Monica too today. So when Dan reached out, he wanted us to talk about the Sun Prairie Equity Framework. And he also said, like, I'd really like if you could address disproportionality and discipline. And so I've got two topics that I'm going to address today, and both, of course, we'd be willing to receive questions on, absolutely. And part of this is really the board's role. So I'm going to hand it over to Tom to talk a bit about the board's role in promoting equity in the school system. So a little bit about Sun Prairie. Of course, we've got, over 8,500 students and counting, 14 schools, soon to be 15 with our second high school. We're nearing 800 teachers and just about 1,300 staff members. And so it's a large system, and we are proud to be about 35% diverse too. So so we are a great school system with all kinds of activities and an opportunity for kids. And so that is Sun Prairie. However, when I got to Sun Prairie in 2015, so I started in the fall of the 15-16 school year, just finished my 5th year, starting my 6th year in Sun Prairie. I really asked the cabinet, we sat down, and I said, I need to better understand what we're doing in terms of equity. And so the cabinet got together and we just started making lists of stuff. And here, this is like snapshots of the actual document that we created in cabinet on October 8th in 2015 relative to equity. And I have this picture in place here, and I know that you can see it, where I have our kids a bit upside down, because it didn't take me long to really understand that while we had a lot of stuff that we were doing in terms of equity at the elementaries and early childhood and the upper middle school and the high school, that none of it was coordinated and none of it was like aligned. And so we had these random acts of equity across the entire system. And so those of you that have heard me speak before, I'm really big on alignment, aligning arrows, because I know what we can do together is far more than what we can do separately. And so the challenge that we had in Sun Prairie, and really the challenge that the state of Wisconsin has, and that the WASB is looking to cultivate resolution toward, is going from a state of random acts of equity into this strategic and focused transformational attention to equity, which is also what your task force is doing in terms of like supporting true system-wide change on behalf of kids. And so this is our story. The first thing that I would say is that if you are a school system that isn't able to ground itself in equity because it is embedded in their vision and mission, you might want to take a look at your mission and vision to see if it really reflects what the community expects of the system. And so for us, we're blessed because we've got the vision right there that says we want to be recognized as a high-performing school district of choice that reflects the cultures of our diverse community. And we want to inspire and prepare every child every day by providing relevant engagement and innovative learning experiences. And what the board and the community has charged us with is to do so not only inside the classroom, but what is particularly interesting right now is to do so outside of the classroom and when kids need it the most. And so we've got 4 basic organizational capacities that we need to do really well in order to make baby steps toward that vision and mission. We need to teach, and the kids need to learn in an exceptional way. We need to have the workforce in order to execute our strategies. We need to continue to communicate and engage with our community. And then for Sun Prairie, we need to have the facilities and the tight operations to fund it all. One of the cross-cutting strategies that we execute across our strategic plan is a constant focus on what role does race play as we are implementing strategies to meet these expectations. And that's so our strategic plan. We're really proud of it. Tom had a pivotal role in creating the strategic plan, even engaging in 60 SWOT analyses with different groups across Sun Prairie in order to create a strategic plan, vision, and mission that reflected the expectations of our school district. And so there's 2 things that really are enablers, or in my vocabulary, antecedents that allow the school district and the administrators to target bias practices, bias policies, and bias behaviors across the school system in order to dismantle those. And so from here, I'm going to turn it over to Tom for 2 things: the board's equity preamble and a recent equity resolution that our school board created. So Tom?
All right. Well, thank you. So our school board in Sun Prairie is, again, very passionate about this whole subject. And I apologize to John Ashley, who's listening, because I inundate him sometimes with a bunch of stuff that we're working on in Sun Prairie, just to kind of keep him up to speed, and we value his opinion as we go through this. But what I'm going to say here is that what our board has realized and understands is that the most powerful way that our board can work and lead in our district and in our community is really by providing a vision and expectations for the direction that the school district's going. And so the 2 things that Brad had mentioned here, which is this equity statement that you see on the slide right now that we created, and that really ends up being the preamble for our governance policies as well. And I'm not going to read it. You can read it as you're sitting there and listening, or you can go to our website and you can see it there. We can email it if you want. But we really take a look at all the different subsets of equity there, and really say that we stand by those folks. We've got their back, and we're going to help advance, again, all kids every day, and we're going to love all of our kids every day to get that accomplished. And the next slide, I think, is just the first page of a couple of page resolution that we passed recently on behalf of our Black students in Sun Prairie. And in that as well, we really take a look at inequities and in some regard racist types of systems that are in place in our organization, probably exist in all of our organizations, and recognize that we need to foster change around those things. And we provide, again, direction, and there's some actionable items at the end of that resolution for all of us in our district. And in particular, Brad, as our superintendent, is really charged with those expectations that the board has. And so as we provide this vision and these expectations for the district through things like an equity statement and resolution and other components within our policies, we're really able to then hold our superintendent accountable through those expectations for progress being made in these areas. And those expectations really get cascaded all the way through the organization, from Brad through his cabinet to our principals, to our teachers and our staff. And so the other thing that does, though, too, is those visions and those expectations that the board is putting out there really also provide our administrators and our staff with the justification to initiate and carry out those programs and those initiatives. And when you've got subject matter like this, that we know is sometimes controversial, sometimes politically charged, certainly emotionally charged for folks in your community, right? It's kind of scary stuff. And for our administrators, Brad in particular, to have true, solid justification for the work that he's doing is really important, I would imagine. Brad can comment on that later, but anyway, and so that's the other thing that those things do from the board, and that really talks to the power and the leadership that you can have within your board in this type of area. And I have two examples of how that has played out in our district already, just in the last, say, 6 to 9 months that we've been working on these documents. The preamble, or the equity statement, actually was put into place a couple of years ago. We've modified it recently to enhance it a bit. But by way of example, two different examples. One is that we have gone through a process in our district just recently that was initiated by a teacher in our district. And it was a program called Listen to Learn. And we had half a dozen or so sessions that we had over 150 people tune into, right? And we talked about race issues and equity issues. And we had testimonials from staff and students within our district talking about what happens sometimes within our organization and how that feels within our organization, and some really powerful stuff. Again, being initiated by a teacher because of this cascading or this trickle down effect of this being an important thing from the board. The other example that we've got is that we really use the phrase, if you will, the concept of see something, say something, in this arena, as well as our security arena, right? We tell our kids to say that from a security standpoint, but we really want to do that here as well. And so coming off of this here, we had a teacher that happened to be, on Facebook, I believe it was, social media of some sort, recently. And of course, we've been doing a lot of social media stuff with distance learning this spring. And found some racist related content and had some concerns over it on the Freckle ELA platform that was out there that our elementary kids were using. And so our administrative staff, our assistant superintendent of teaching and learning, Steph Leonard-Whitty, took that information, verified it, of course, but we went out then and contacted directly Renaissance, which is the corporation that runs Freckle and also STAR assessments as well out there, if you know those. And we went to them, explained what we saw, how it was wrong, and actually made some demands of them. And we had asked them specifically for what their definition of racism and anti-racism is. We asked them for their statement regarding equity from a corporate standpoint. And we also had suggested that we weren't sure that we necessarily believed that those racist types of things were only in that ELA Freckle program, and that they really needed to conduct a thorough review of all their programming that they put out, the kids see, and a couple of other things. And so we did get a response back from the CEO of Renaissance then, and they've gone through and they've updated their content review guidelines to include a lot more stringent and precise checking around biases and those types of things. They're stepping up, holding their content folks to doing appropriate things. They're conducting some content appropriateness workshops, easy for me to say apparently, with their folks. And they are doing a full review of all their platforms to look for that type of thing. And so that statement and that resolution and that discussion by the board at that level has given our administrators the ability to go forward, have those conversations, put practices in place that resulted in that teacher feeling comfortable to come forward and say, "Hey, I see this out there on their social media, and it's not right." So that's a little bit to talk about where we're at as a board, how we look at moving these things forward, and how these things can be actually actionable.
Okay, so thanks, Tom. So we know in Sun Prairie that that there are a number of things that create this set of circumstances that allow us to do this important work. And that important work is looking at areas in your district, looking at policies, looking at practices, and looking at behaviors to examine them for bias, privilege, and discriminatory practice, and then to dismantle those things. And so an administrator can't go after bias, policy, bias in practices, or bias in teacher behaviors or busing behaviors, and I'm talking about adults, without the support of a community vision and board governance. And so what we did is develop this set of circumstances that are all enablers to help this school district in Sun Prairie target and dismantle racist policies, practices, and behaviors. And so I started with community-based vision, and that we want to be recognized as a high-performing school district of choice that reflects the cultures of our diverse community. But that's not the only thing. We've got a board that has equity and expectations that are disaggregated. We also have student representatives. The board has developed an equity statement, which Tom just went over for you. They have even developed a way to recognize our Black Excellence Matters, Black Excellence and Achievement Matters within our student body. And then, of course, Tom is leading this task force for statewide leadership. What that enables us to do then is set up a strategic approach, which is that like going sort of counterclockwise. That is the third area as you're going from the top to the left and all the way down. So there we have a partnership with a group called the Pacific Education Group. But what that allows us to do is implement a critical race theory and then also a beyond diversity training for E-teams across the system, which leads us into site work. So at each individual site, we have equity teams or E-teams that are trained in examining policies, practices, and behaviors for bias or privilege in order to dismantle them at sites. And from there, then we go into a community partnership where we've got a select menu of different partners that we bring in order to help us do this work. And so really our core theory in Sun Prairie is that you can't have random acts of equity. It starts with a vision, it's supported and articulated by the board, and then it's the administrative team's prerogative and responsibility to implement the system strategies. And for us, it's an equity-infused strategic plan that's cascaded to E-teams across the system with rich partnerships in our community in order to execute that strategic plan. And so we've got this like closed loop cycle that we're engaged in and also that we're proud of. Now, what I'll do is I'll forward our PowerPoint to Dr. Neerad and Louise to make sure that they have it. And what I have in this PowerPoint are the breakouts of each area. Just for the purpose of time, I'm not going to go over them now, but I'll give you the PowerPoint. And so that way anyone that's watching this webinar can look back and like look at with detail some of the individual like partnerships for say that we would have with our with the communities and partnership aspect of our equity framework. Another thing that I want to show you is that when the board expects specific data that's disaggregated by race, that makes then our cascaded strategic plan have to have that. So this is an example, and I just pulled our 1920 strategic plan that includes fixed metrics that we cascade across the entire system, and embedded in here are expectations that we actually disaggregate for race, because we know that the board is going to require that when we present monitoring reports. And so what that requires is that each individual site also has conversations specific to race, because in Sun Prairie, what we believe is that we're not going to be able to improve unless we talk about it. And so we actually directly cascade that across the system. And that's also part of the best practice that our partners with the Specific Education Group have really trained us to be able to do. Okay, so what has happened in Sun Prairie because of this? And so these are a couple of the results. The first thing is that we've continued to be focused on staff development. So over the last 3 years, have had over 100 separate opportunities for equity-focused staff development, and over 1,000 teachers, administrators, and staff have taken part in that, which is amazing. We've increased our diversity of our staff to almost 15%, and we've also developed what is turning out to be one of the best programs that we have, which is a Grow Your Own program for future educators of color. We've adopted the teaching's tolerance standards, which are infused in K through 12 social studies curriculum, and that was also a specific recommendation that we actually teach specific to social justice standards instead of not talking about it and having sort of this random nature of addressing social justice across the system. In this case, it's embedded. Like I said, we have E-teams across the system that are trained in locating policies, practices, and behaviors that are racist or discriminatory. And then also we are expanding our community schools program this year to one of our 9 elementary schools called Northside Elementary, which the board has also been really, really supportive of. One of the things that we're proud of is that our work actually was recognized by the Specific Education Group, and we were able to present at their national conference. And so this is a picture of some of our principals and the board members actually going to the Pacific Education Group National Summit in order to present our work on our equity framework, which was just a real privilege in order to be able to put our work on display for other equity leaders across the nation and the world. So I'm going to pivot toward disproportionality and discipline. Dan said it was important, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit. And so I'm actually not going to talk about discipline at all when I talk about disproportionality and discipline. And I'm going to present what I call a spider chart or a radar chart. And so if you're an engineer like Tom, you're used to this kind of chart, or if you're a data geek like I am, you're also used to this kind of chart. But basically what you're doing is you're rating multiple factors of execution, the degree to which you're executing some type of factor. And so this is an example of something that we look at in Sun Prairie, okay? Because disproportionality and discipline isn't about discipline. It's about other factors being executed to an exceptional degree. So I know very quickly, if I walk into an elementary school and I see the signs of a universally implemented curriculum that is personalized, added with the execution, the fidelity of the execution for our social emotional learning curriculum, and when I look at a strong focus on equity and social justice, and if I actually ask, you know, I'd like to see the minutes for your MTSS, or we call it our equitable multi-level system as a support, which is like sort of a synonym for the RTI model that people are used to across the state of Wisconsin. If I look at the degree to which that they are implementing academic and career plans and guidance offices, or if there's an atmosphere of efficacy with teachers, meaning that they believe that those kids can do it, if I see deliberate teaching by staff in libraries, for example, for us on digital citizenship, and if I see strong indicators that staff are teaching positive behaviors to kids, they minimize discipline. Discipline really is not about compliance and making kids follow rules. And the more that we fall into this trap of doubling down on figuring out how to make kids be more compliant, how to make them follow the rules, how we can double down on getting them more in trouble when they don't follow the rules, the more that we will inadvertently exacerbate disproportionality across the state of Wisconsin and the nation. If we flip the script and say, you know, we're not going to fall down that hole of discipline. What we're actually going to do is make sure that our curriculum is being implemented, that our kids are able to be reached by social emotional learning, that we are going to explicitly talk about equity and social justice, that when kids are falling behind, we have the systems to meet them where they're at and help them, that they're going to understand relevance because what they're doing right now is connected to a future plan, that the teachers believe in them, and that social media isn't something that you can trust all the time and you have to watch yourself out there, and that there are positive behaviors that help you become regulated and engage. You don't have as much issues with discipline. And so like I told Dan, like he asked me, like, you know, I'd like you to speak about discipline. And I said, okay, but just know I'm not going to really talk about discipline. because that's not where the secret sauce is. The secret sauce is flipping the script and going the other way. And so that's the theoretical framework in Sun Prairie relative to disproportionality and discipline. So what's next for Sun Prairie? We're going to continue our partnership with the Pacific Education Group. We're actually expanding it to our police liaisons, where we will do a job analysis of really the description. We will have better clarity with the police department on when we have our police officers involved. And we're really going to make sure that we work on how our police officers appear and to make certain that that matches what they're committed to, which is community policing. We're going to look at our handbooks and we're going to revise them to be more proactive and less language that mirrors consequence or criminalized language that you might find in laws. And we're going to refocus that to be more restorative. We're going to fast track K through 12 social studies curriculum that provides more of a global perspective and that is less Eurocentric. We're also going to look at consistency in E-teams across our 14 schools, because at this point we do have variance in effectiveness across our E-teams. And we're also going to continue the expansion of restorative circles in all of our schools. So because at this point right now, that's not consistent. And we want to make sure that's consistent across our schools. And so that's my last slide. So I don't know, I'll turn it over to Dan and Louise. I went really fast, you guys, because I didn't want to back us up, and I wanted to make sure that Monica had time to talk.
Well, Brad and Tom, all I can say is, wow, you've done some fantastic work, and I'm really impressive. And there are a couple of questions in the chat room for you. One of them is, how does the district help all parents? How does the district help all parents view equity as benefiting all students rather than viewing school resources as being directed towards certain students at the expense of others?
So for school districts that do not have a connection to their vision and mission, people will have this feeling of loss instead of a common vision. And so that is a difficult thing to get to, but the best answer that a school board and an administrative team can stand on is they're looking at allocating resources to match the goals they have for kids is to be grounded in a vision and mission. And so when I look at something like that, and I really look at the root cause, it's more about a shared vision than it is about fighting for resources. And so it also means that like the board and the entire community have to be willing to look at what is the vision, what are the goals that would indicate that you're making progress toward your vision, and are we willing to allocate resources that align to the strategies to meet our goals? And so that's something that's like an important thought sequence for us to get into. Otherwise, people will get all confused in the meantime of like, I feel fragile because this resource is taken away, and why are we dividing people by not doing that? And it's not about any of that stuff. It's about a common vision. And so that's a sort of an ambiguous answer, but I think it is the most accurate answer.
Yeah, excellent. Another question, Brad, is did Sun Prairie encounter resistance in your efforts to adopt the resolution? And if you did, how were you able to overcome it?
So the board resolution was a board resolution, so I didn't have any issues with that. And I think I'll let Tom talk to that in a second. But as we have gone down the road of locating and dismantling discrimination in policies, practices, and behaviors, I would say yes. Groups of people that called for my resignation, all kinds of people that show up to board meetings. We have had people ask the board to reconsider policy changes and lots of stuff. And that's the good trouble that you get into when you are going to be someone that cares enough and has the courage enough to enable the dismantling of bigotry in policy. And so, yes, we've had a lot of that. That's why I'm so gray. So, Tom, I don't know if you want to speak to just the passing of the policy at the board level.
Yeah, just I guess real briefly, what really helps is when we're able to have conversation at the board table and bring a policy forward. Typically, that's written by one or two people before it comes forward to the board. We spend time with each other. We know each other as individuals on the board, and we're friends, we're colleagues, and but our board is runs the gamut from a political standpoint. For instance, in our community, from quite liberal all the way through very conservative Trump supporter as well. And so when we can come together and have those discussions, all of us, and I think our community can usually identify with somebody on the board that sort of matches their ideology, and we can pass both of those resolutions, for instance, that we were talking about, the resolution and the equity statement, unanimously with the board, that really helps. Now, as Brad said, we do get pushback. We get a lot of concerned parents about a wide variety of issues. But one of the things that we continue to do is we really embrace engaging the community. And so our community was really up in arms about discipline, and bullying and those types of things. And it got really kind of ugly for a little while there. Our solution to that was to develop a behavior and bullying task force. And we brought 40 members of the community together. And we had, over the course of 8 2.5-hour meetings, we had a lot of discussion about what these subjects are and provided some insight and transparency about what we do well, what we don't do well, and how those things work. And then got a list of recommendations from that group of community members, not just parents, but really truly a broad, diverse section of our community. And now, over the last 9 months or so, the board has embraced those, and our administrative team is working on those on many of those changes that they had brought forward. And then we will go back again in both September of this year, and then on the anniversary of that task force being complete in the spring, I think it was March, February, March next year, and we will have a report back out to the community. We'll invite that task force back to our board meeting, and we'll talk about explicitly what we've done around those recommendations that our community gave us. And so that's just a little snippet, but we continue to go back to our community and have those conversations with them.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. In the interest of time, there are just a couple more questions, but maybe at the end we'll have some opportunity to answer them. I'm going to turn it over to Monica. Is Dr. Monica Kelsey Brown. She's the superintendent of Brown Deer, and she's going to share her process and journey of this equity and social justice. So Monica, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I am ecstatic about this opportunity to engage in this conversation at a very high level with board members and WASB. What we know about the equity work is until we have the courage and the bravery and the willingness to be uncomfortable in this work, that we won't make any changes. And so in order for us to begin to interrupt the status quo around these systems that have been in place for 400 years, recognizing that school systems were not set up for the demographic of students that we now serve. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to become allies in this work to make sure that we dismantle these systems. We review policies that were set up for individuals who have been noted as the other or have been labeled as something else because they weren't they didn't fit the round hole. And so with my journey in equity started many years ago. The terminology has changed over time. It has moved from culturally responsive teaching practice. It was multicultural education once, and then it became culturally responsive teaching practices, and now we're moving into the terminology around equity. The terminology doesn't matter. What matters is what we do with the work. And so I will share my screen with you. And hopefully I won't run out of time because I do have a video I'd like to share with you that I share with my new teachers when they come in. Last year, our district administrators, building administrators, and our school board worked together to develop our equity policy. We took probably 2 to 3 months to develop our equity vision, which then turned into a policy, which is noted here. And so our equity vision is the Brown Deer School District will remove systemic barriers and improve practices to ensure high quality academic and social emotional learning experiences for all students. Next slide, please. And so this is where we began the work as we engaged in our conversations. And I won't go into these slides because I know many of you have seen these slides over time. But the conversation that we have here in the Brown Deer School District is equity is giving students what they need when they need it. Not when we believe they need it, but at the time that the concern arises, we want to meet them where they are and take them to the next level. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we are all trying to move to the journey of social justice for all of our students. And so this last panel here, because I know in the spirit we're up against time, but on this last panel here, we see all 3 of our students can see the game without supports or accommodations because the causes of the inequities were addressed. And so we in our district are constantly having conversations about the fact that this is not about individual work. This is not about blaming or shaming or judging anyone on this journey. We do have equity norms that we abide by, but the work is about interrupting a system that has been in place for 400 years. So we had to work through that with our staff initially because so often the fallback is, I'm not racist. I love my children. I'll do what's best for my children. When our implicit and explicit biases oftentimes show up, or our power and our privilege will show up, and we're not understanding how we are continuing to marginalize students or keep those systems in place that prevent them from being successful. So on this next slide, Louise, I hope you can pull this one up because I really wanted you all to see this. This is a video that I share with my new teachers every year that talks about this whole idea of fitting the round peg into the square hole. Because if you don't show up in a system and, can you hear it? So I'll just talk through it, and when you get an opportunity, you can look at it a little later. But again, the title is I Sued the School System. So essentially what this video is about is how we expect our students to show up and fit inside of these systems when they've already been deemed as the other coming inside of these systems. And so when I share this video with our new teachers, we have a dialogue about it as it relates to the equity work. And this is what I consider as my entry point with my new teachers to help them understand that we're on this journey. And not only are we going to talk the talk, but we are also going to walk the walk. So I implore you when you get a chance to, or encourage you when you get a chance to, if you've not seen this video before, again, it's called I Sued the School System. It really takes you on this journey around what is happening in our schools as it relates to how we see education or how we present education in our buildings to our students. Next slide, please. So Brown Deer's journey. In 2012, we had Dr. Dakota Irby, and this is before my time. I arrived in Brown Deer in 2015. But Dr. Dakota Irby, who was a University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee professor at the time, came to Brown Deer and conducted a professional development session on raising Black student achievement through culturally responsive teaching. And so there were a series of conversations that, as I understand it, transpired as a result, as the district was moving toward putting this idea of culturally responsive teaching practices into action. What you should know is, and Dr. Kerr has shared this with me on numerous occasions, when she came to Brown Deer, it was a predominantly Caucasian school district, and as her years as she progressed during her tenure, she watched the district totally flip, actually. So about 90%, 90% of the students were Caucasian when she arrived, and now between 70 and 80% of our district is now students of color. So if you imagine walking that journey, the mindset has to change, and the shift has to come along with individuals who we have served over the years, who now look different than students that we used to serve. And so there were some conversations around that. So when I came to arrive at Brown Deer, I had already engaged in equity training with Dr. Elise Fratura and Colleen Capper I was pursuing my master's at the time, so I had been in the work for a while and deemed it appropriate to bring it to Brown Deer in 2015. And so what we did is we engaged a small cadre of our administrators and our teachers. We sort of dipped our feet in the water first to understand, is this something that we really wanted to take on, and understand where we wanted to go on this journey. So our board hadn't quite gotten into the work at that point yet. But what also worked on our behalf was the fact that we are also part of the Closing the Achievement Gap Consortium, which is a partnership with Concordia University, and the composition is both public, private, charter, suburban schools who come together and talk about this equity work. One of the pieces that I'm proud of as part of the Closing the Achievement Gap Consortium is I am the director of the African American Female Institute. So that is one of the initiatives that was born out of CAGC that started 3 years ago. And then we also have the Boys Initiative as well. But with that being said, so August 2015, we did establish a district equity team as we continued to engage in this work. And begin to have those courageous conversations about just equity. What I will share with you is there was still a level of trepidation about really jumping in and having the conversations about race. So I know many of you, as we know on this journey, we will sometimes allow class or socioeconomic status to cloud the idea of the racial injustices that happens in our school districts. From there, August 2016, we brought Dr. Anthony Muhammad to the district for our back to school kickoff. And so he talked about creating a healthy culture in our school districts. We also engaged in a district-wide book study with the growth mindset. So as we know in this work, we are talking about shifting mindsets from what I know to where we're trying to go. And so all of my new teachers, as the assistant superintendent and director of teaching and learning, all of our new teachers would engage in the growth mindset book study. We took it chapter by chapter, and we would meet once a month to help them understand where we are in the work and where we're trying to go. Then in 2017-18, we took the leap of faith, and we decided to provide professional development in the integrated comprehensive systems work with Dr. Capper and Dr. Fratura, and we actually trained our entire district. Let me back up for a moment, if I may, and just share a few demographics about Brown Deer, in that we are a first-tier suburb of Milwaukee. As I stated, 70% of our students are students of color. In that composition are African-American students, mostly Hmong population. We have about a 20% EL population, and then 20% students with disabilities. So we're pretty diverse, we are diverse in nature in the Brown Deer School District. We have 1,600 students is our population, and we have 3 buildings. We have one elementary school with 750 students. We have a middle school with about 350, and our high school is about approximately 400 students. And so we are set all on one campus, and I love the idea behind being able to walk between buildings without moving my car for a day. So I love it. So with that, we also established what we called a district equity team, district collaborative equity team, because we then wanted a composition of individuals that represented all of our stakeholders, from parents to support staff to teachers to administrators to district staff to begin to engage in those conversations about equity, looking at the data to help us drive our conversations. And so while we, sometimes it is possible to turn a blind eye to the gaps that exist in our school district, but if you allow your data to drive the conversations in terms of the gaps, in terms of the access to opportunity for students, that's where the conversations can begin. And so that was part of our approach to the journey in Brown Deer. In August 2017, next slide for me, Louise, please. In August 2017, Dr. Louise Cruz, who is a great partner, collaborates with Dr. Muhammad quite a bit, came to us and presented our new teacher kickoff. We try to do something around equity for our new teacher kickoff every year. His title was Closing the Knowing and Doing Gap and Transforming School Culture for All. Essentially what we are talking about are school cultures. And then Dr. Gloria Lassen-Billings came. She wrote Dream Keepers and Successful Teachers of African American Teachers. In June of that same year, we brought Dr. Shiraki Holly. And then we proceeded to begin with our district collaborative work team, being driven by and led by and facilitated by Dr. Fatura, who would come and meet with us every month to help us to continue to drive the work. In summer 2019, Dr. Kerr and I led all of the district administrators in going through the modules, the equity modules, and then determining where we wanted to begin our conversations in the work. This past summer, as a result of the COVID and also the Floyd George incident that occurred, we began to have conversations about it gave individuals who were uncomfortable with these conversations permission to begin talking about race. So what I did is I started a series of virtual town hall meetings with our teachers. We meet, we'll have our third town hall meeting in August. But what we've done is the purpose for setting up the virtual town hall meetings was, number one, everyone could meet where they wanted to meet. So we didn't have to come together in a room to have a conversation. So you could feel comfortable in your own space. And so right after the Mr. George incident, I probably had about 50 staff on the virtual town hall meeting. But what it provided an opportunity for individuals to do is, it was so powerful because they talked about their own experiences and either being a representative of a racialized group and how they've been marginalized or treated in respective workplaces or school districts. And then it provided an opportunity for our staff to say, you know, Monica, we really do want to have conversations with our students about this, but we don't know how. So what we recognized is that everyone is at a different entry point in this conversation. But as the administrator, what I'm sharing with our staff is conversations around equity, number one, will not go away. So I will be unrelenting in this work or relentless in this work. And number two, I'm giving them permission to feel comfortable to talk about race. Now, beyond that, on our last virtual town hall meeting, I left everyone with a homework assignment, and their homework assignment was, what barriers are we going to remove, systemic barriers that we know exist in the culture as part of the culture in our buildings? What barriers are we going to remove that we know continues to marginalize students, that does not allow us to interrupt the status quo? Are we willing to remove to set our students up for success? So our next town hall meeting is August 9th, I believe it is. We do these on Sundays at 5 o'clock. I call them live at 5, is what I call them. And they're going to bring back the information regarding what barriers can be removed. And then on my next, the next piece of this journey for us is to begin to tackle or grapple with our own implicit and explicit biases as it relates to how we allow students to show up in our schools without the ability to not judge them right away, accept them for who they are, allow them to show up for who they are in their buildings. And so on this journey, we use these norms here that you see you're going to experience discomfort in this conversation. And what I will share with you is, as a person of color, one of few trying to have these conversations, it lends itself to something kind of different. And I say that because I'm a marginalized individual trying to help a majority population understand what it looks like and how it's received and how it feels. And so, as one who's trying to interrupt the status quo in a space where I've experienced the marginalization, there's some dichotomy there that I have to that I navigate on this journey. It doesn't give me an excuse not to do it, but it makes me think about how I show up in the work, but also sharing my experiences in terms of my own schooling or working in a particular organization. So we let everyone know right up front, you're going to be uncomfortable. We ask everyone to stay engaged, speak your truth, and know that at the end of any one of these journeys on this conversation, we're going to have to accept non-closure. We're not, just like the pandemic that we're in through Corona. I've shared with my staff, the other pandemic is this issue of injustices that people encounter by the mere fact that you look the way you look. It's all about assumptions and biases and how people show up. So if you're considered as part of the other, there are assumptions that are made about individuals. And then again, if you're the round peg that doesn't fit the square hole, then you're considered other, and we feel like we have to do something different. And so I know we're running out of time, but I just want to add these 3 pieces as it relates to academically what we're doing. We are having numerous conversations about disproportionate representation in discipline. And Brad, I love the fact that you don't use the word discipline because it turns into a control. How do we control how do we control a group of kids? But what we are, we're looking at our discipline data. We are also looking at increasing the number and percentage of students in our AP courses, and we're making some headway in that regard, and also dismantling tracking. So what has happened in some of our schools is when we didn't believe the students could do the work, we created another space for them, right? Rather than including them in the Common Core standards that every other child is receiving. So my administrators in the upcoming school year are charged with making sure all 8th graders take algebra. And so they will all take algebra, but what we will do, thank you, Brad, what we will do in the class is, rather than separating students from the class, we are going to provide the supports within the class for students to be successful. So it's 8:25, and I realize we are pressed for time, but that is just a snapshot of the journey we're on in Brown Deer regarding the equity conversations. And I'll just say, more importantly than anything is, I believe that we all have to be allies in this work. And so the see something, say something is awesome. The extension to that is we have to do something. And that's what I think is very important in this work. And when our students realize that we're there to advocate for them, they will rise. I'm of the belief that they will rise to the occasion. So it's 8:26, and I will let it rest there for the Brown Deer journey, but I'm more than happy to speak to anyone about this work. It is more important now than ever before. And I am mindful of the fact that I still say that we have to say that these gaps that we have in learning it is a pandemic, and it has always been a pandemic. It's unfortunate that it took this long for us to get to this space, but the good news is we're here. And so I appreciate my board, who has been amazing. They have all been amazing supporters on this journey, and they participate in every Closing the Achievement Gap board symposium that we have every year. And the majority of my board members are always present and willing to have those conversations. So again, when you get a chance, take a look at the video. I think it speaks volumes to what is happening in our schools from a visual perspective. And I'm in it for the long haul, because I know that someone paid it forward for me. And I stand on the shoulders of giants, and it is my responsibility to pay it forward for others. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Monica, and
You're
also
welcome.
Brad and Tom. And I'm going to hand it over to Dan for our closing. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but we will be revisiting this topic coming up in several other webinars in the future. So I'm hoping that you can join us and we can get more in there. I really applaud your courage, both in Sun Prairie and Brown Deer, and continue the great work. And we're behind you all the way. And we just want to spread the good word of all that you are doing for equity and social justice and racial justice for our children. So Dan?
Well, thank you very much, Louise, and thank you very much, Tom, Monica, and Brad. We can learn from each other, and you truly are exemplars of some of the most challenging work and some of the most needed work that needs to take place in our schools. So thank you for your courage. Just a couple of quotes that were shared along the way, just to emphasize a point. Can't improve unless we can talk about it. And then another quote was, courage and bravery to be uncomfortable. These are not easy issues to talk about. And they're in fact endemic in our society. And as I said in the beginning, we are a microcosm of that broader society. But we're a place called school, and we have this awesome opportunity to be able to impact the lives of children and help them not only develop well as learners, but to help them learn about each other and to be kind and to learn to interact in peaceful kinds of ways. The method behind our madness here is to have this series of webinars, and tonight is the first of those webinars. And our overall goal is to be able to reflect on the Board of Directors, WASB Board of Directors statement that was approved in June and then briefly updated in July, which had a series of questions that were posed in that letter, in that resolution rather, to help school districts think about the scope of this work, or what kinds of elements you could consider in facing these challenges. So what we want to be able to do is to use these webinars as an opportunity to provide exemplars, practitioners that can help us learn about each of those questions over a period of time to be able to have an impact across this entire state. And we're encouraged by what we hear tonight, and I've learned a great deal from these practitioners tonight. And so we're going to continue this effort. And one of the things that we are asking for as we close tonight, we framed it up in the invitation or the description as a call to action. And let me tell you what we meant by that. What we meant by that was there are many places you can begin this work. And the metaphor that Tom referred to earlier is around kind of the metaphor of the highway, and there's various on-ramps to be able to get on to do something that's important to get to a destination. So if we can use that metaphor for this work, is what will be your on-ramp. And our greatest hope is that you make the
Looks like we lost Dan.
this is not about a light switch kind of issue. It's about kind of making the right decisions over time and the need to learn to be able to do that. So with that, thank you very, very much.
Thank you again to our panelists and those of you that took the time to attend this workshop. I hope we see you in September when we do this again. I know that there were some questions and comments in the chat, and I apologize we don't have time to go through it, but I'm wondering if we can maybe get those questions to Brad and Monica, and you could possibly answer them through email or something like that, if that would work in your busy schedule.
I'd be happy.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, I wish you all the rest of the evening is a good one and a relaxing one, and that you will do some reflecting on what you've heard, and that we can start this so-called journey, and just at least get something going, get on the on-ramp and do something, and use our panelists and the information they provided tonight as models and support for this work. So thank you, everyone, and we hope to hear from you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank
Good
you
night.
very much.
Yes,
night.
thank you to everybody.